the racist logic of 1920s, 1930s America that this was an Italian restaurant, perhaps one in his neighborhood around Greenwich Village. Next to this vulgar, quote-unquote, panel is this kind of opening where there's this upward sloping brass railing that leads to somewhere we know not where, but with this like spectral apparition, this ghost-like apparition up at the top. And then there's this paneling, perhaps mahogany, that goes across the back of the restaurant, inset with mirrors, perhaps, in front of which are 3 tablecloth-covered square tables with these characteristic cafe chairs with these whipping Art Nouveau curves in Greenwich Village restaurants at the moment, with 2 people sitting at the center table dining together, a man and a woman, one who has hung his hat, the other who has hung her coat. She is wearing a hat, and in between them is perhaps an olive oil bottle. He raises his hand in the air, perhaps holding a cigarette or a toothpick pressed between his fingers. And then beyond them is a woman who stands at a cash register, perhaps tallying up a receipt. And she's standing next to an aquamarine vitrine that is filled with objects that you might buy before or after a meal, maybe mints, toothpicks, cigarettes, or lighters, and perhaps there's a kind of mint or toothpick dispenser on this aquamarine vitrine. We have these characteristic gray and white tile floor that leads our eye perhaps up to these 2 plants, potted plants, that flank a number of ingredients in the window. And it was characteristic for restaurants in this moment in 1930s New York to display their ingredients. You could go in at this moment and buy ingredients, and there was also a way of advertising the freshness of the food they would make. And in it, in this display, you can see there are 2 blue plates that have on them cuts of fresh meat, champagne bottles, 2 A-frame signs, this ribboned basket that is filled with oranges, apples, and a pineapple, as well as heads of lettuce, and a cascading row of oranges or perhaps grapefruit that come out the front of the canvas, the last of which is halved, perhaps suggesting that we imagine the rest of the grapefruit in space. And in this built-up world, Hopper has painted a little triangle of cement in the lower right-hand corner of the picture, reminding us that we're standing outside of this plate glass window, that we're standing on the cement sidewalk, right? And if we believe that fiction, then the window kind of extends like this, basically, right? It's at an oblique angle, and it's kind of, if we're standing on the sidewalk here as the viewer, then the plate glass window is here. And I like to imagine this, this window, this imagined window, as a magic door. And I like to think of it that way specifically because there was a woman writing in the 1920s, I think a very underappreciated woman, who wrote a book in that year, in 1920, called Greenwich Village, in which she inventories the culture of Greenwich Village. And this woman's name was Anne Chaplin. And in this book, Anne Chaplin writes a chapter about Greenwich Village restaurants, and she called it Greenwich Village Restaurants, The Magic Door, which is such a great title. And in that chapter, Anne Chaplin writes about the wild world of Greenwich Village restaurants. For example, there was the Black Cat and the Pepper Pot on West 4th, where you could go listen to music, you could have your tarot read, you could get a hot bowl of soup, and notice the Pepper Pot, the Black Cat, these kind of witchy titles. These restaurants were often owned and operated by women who self-styled in bohemian fashions and were interested in the occult and tarot, etc. It's very intentional. But Anne Chaplin also writes about these other kinds of places, these odd places, like a kind of hole in the wall that was just bricks removed in an alleyway. You would go duck through this opening, like Diagon Alley, like Harry Potter-like, and you would ascend this spiraled ladder to this 3rd floor turreted loft space that only had 2 tables and had red painted rafters and whitewashed red brick walls. And there was a woman there who would serve you coffee, and there was no name for this place. It was kind of a magical place. And maybe this opening, this aperture to we know not where with this spectral apparition is something of that magic door. One important fact about Edward Hopper's life is that his wife was also an artist, Josephine Nivison Hopper, but she was also, Josephine, a model for all of his paintings. So all the female identified people in Hopper's pictures are Josephine Hopper, whose appearance has been slightly manipulated. So this woman is Josephine Nivison, and she was also an actress. She was in the Village theater circuit, and so she kind of method acted her model characters. And she described this woman in this picture, whom she modeled for, as a woman called Mrs. Pope Logales. Mrs. Pope Logales. And she gave us no other information. So we have no idea who this is. But I like to think of that in terms of Anne Chaplin's writings. She wrote, for example, about this Italian restaurant that was right across the street from the Hoppers' studio on Washington Square North. And this restaurant was on Washington Square South. It was called Bertolotti's. And Anne Chaplin writes that you would go into Bertolotti's, and you could go to the back of that restaurant, and there was this secret door, and you could go through it, and there was a garden that backed up to Judson Memorial Church. And the restaurant could have put tables there, but Anne Chaplin says, no, they didn't. Instead, all this restaurant put in the garden was a shed with a bed. And in this shed lived a man named Chestnut. And this old man's job was to tell the mystical stories of his encounters with ghosts in Italy to the patrons of the restaurant. So maybe there's something, right, of the characterological reality that the Hoppers may have encountered in this wild and quirky world of restaurants in Greenwich Village. And, maybe, this woman, who so often has been interpreted as a kind of object on display, is not so much that, but more maybe reaching for us. Like if Josephine Hopper modeled for her, Josephine is reaching for us as future viewers, like wanting to shake our hand, to invite us to a world that was real to her and to him as they lived in Greenwich Village. That if we suspend our reality for a moment and we believe the fiction of this painting that welcomes all people to believe it, we can walk through like Hopper's magic door into the past, into Greenwich Village, and into restaurants like Bertolotti's. Okay, thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you.